Good Lord, we're back. Peace, everybody. It's your man Bleak. Welcome back to another installment of Scarecrow's Chamber. Today, I would like to talk about a form of entertainment that has been with me since I was able to walk, since I was able to formulate a memory. And that form of entertainment is none other than professional wrestling. I'm sorry. But professional wrestling, man, for some reason, it is something that has just stuck with me for years, man. It's one of the most entertaining things outside of, motion pictures and video games and stuff like that. And it's just something that I've always loved. Professional wrestling, man. It's so entertaining. Even the crazy thing about it, when you talk about the art of combat, wrestling is probably the oldest form of combat. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, stuff like that. It's probably, it has to be the oldest form of combat when you talk about, just going back to the old stadium fighting days and stuff like that. Roman Coliseum and the Egyptian wars and stuff like that. Wrestling is something that's been around since recorded time, man. And of course, throughout the centuries, wrestling has, because what started out to be a form of combat for survival, fighting wars and stuff like that, but over time it became something that was a form of entertainment, even back during the ancient times where you would see, combatants compete in, stadiums and stuff like that. It was something that really, really was always seen as a form of entertainment, especially after, the times of war and stuff like that. Even throughout, it was also used in form of combat in wars and also entertainment. War and entertainment. War and entertainment. War and entertainment. And it's something that's always, been, throughout history. And professional wrestling, it's something that I've always loved. And I mean, I don't, watch it as much that I used to today because I don't think it is as great as it used to be. But when I was a kid, man, the early days, man, I was watching, the NWA and the national, not NWA, not niggas with attitude. NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, and this goes back, because when wrestling, became a big form of entertainment, at least in the United States, wrestling used to be seen in local syndications. They used to, call these things territories. They had wrestling territories in different parts of the country. You had some in the Mid-South, and then you had some in the East, and had the North and the Pacific, Northwest, West Coast and stuff like that, even in Canada and stuff like that. So wrestling used to be dominated by territory, and there was always like local syndication and stuff like that. Whatever region of the country you lived in, that's what you predominantly saw. That's how it started. And then of course a big name in wrestling, you probably know his name, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. He became a big name, especially with the World Wrestling Federation, which is what I grew up watching. World Wrestling Federation, of course today WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. But yeah, man, WCW, World Championship Wrestling, and like I said, National Wrestling Alliance, and a little bit of Japan. Not much. I didn't really see much Japan until I got older, but it was predominantly NWA, WCW, and WWE. And it was just so fun to me, man, because that's the thing. A lot of people, will look at, because people who really are into like combat sports, just say, oh, wrestling is fake and all that stuff. But I didn't care because, especially during the early days, wrestling, had this thing called kayfabe. And if you don't know what kayfabe is basically, even though that it is a performance, it's theatrics and stuff like that, but what kayfabe did it put you in this state of mind that it can be real, especially with the way that the characters were portrayed and stuff like that. You had these larger than life, figures, superhumans, not real people and stuff like that. So wrestling as an art form was a combination of not just combat, but also these things that the wrestlers do called promos. It's like speaking on the mic. You're like an MC on the mic. So wrestling was very big on that, and a lot of things of the profession of boxing, and now what you see with the UFC and all that stuff, all that trash talking and stuff like that. They like boxing, aficionados and people in the UFC. They probably don't want to admit this, but a lot of all of that stuff came from professional wrestling. It goes way back to the 1930s and stuff like that. For example, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was a big wrestling fan too, and how he said that he came up with with that persona, trash talking and stuff like that, and just being very, very charismatic on the mic and stuff like that. He actually got that from a wrestler. I believe it was a wrestler called Gorgeous George. I believe that was the wrestler he got it from. But a lot of that, that stuff that you see in boxing today, and all of that back and forth that you see in boxing and MMA and UFC and stuff, that came from the professional wrestling. Even though a lot of the MMA guys, they always want to crap on wrestling, so they oh, these guys are not tough and stuff like that. But I tell you right now, man, one of the toughest names that you hear in wrestling, man, was a guy named King Tonka. Some of you may know who he is. He's actually related to The Rock. He also went by name of Haku and stuff like that, and Ming. But like, he's one of the toughest sons of guns. Every time when wrestlers talk about who the toughest guy they knew in the business, it was always his name that's come up. And The Rock actually had a funny story. They were like in a bar or something like that, and some guy just wouldn't leave him alone, and he bit the guy's nose off. It was crazy. But growing up, obviously, if you're a wrestling fan like me, you have your favorites, right? And two of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Bret the Hitman Hart, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, man. When you talk about technicians, man, he was the calling card for me, man. I love Bret the Hitman Hart ever since I saw him as a kid, man. Watching him in the tag matches with the late great Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Just seeing him too, I just fell in love with Bret Hart the first time I saw him, man. He's definitely my favorite of all time. And I also love Booker T. Booker T was when you watch Booker T, and his brother Stevie Ray and the Harlem Heat and stuff like that, man, it just captures you immediately. Not just because they were brothers, but I just love their style, man. Booker T, I just love. There's nobody in wrestling history that moves like him, man. And the crazy thing about it, Booker T had like a dancing background. For those who know that Booker T he was known for this type of boogie move, this b-boy move called the spinneroonie, where he would actually get on the ground and like spin on his back and stuff like that. That actually came from his days as a dancer and stuff back in the day. And the professional wrestling, like every wrestler, they had like these moves called finishers. And like I said, wrestling is such an art. A lot of people don't know it. It's such an art, man. And because even though it's theatrics, but it's an art form. You got to know how to take a punch and do these things called bumps, where people will just fall on their back and receiving moves. Like it's a whole big terminology that wrestlers use. Taking bumps and doing the honors and doing the job and all this stuff. And babyface is a good guy and a heel is, a babyface is a good guy and a heel is a bad guy. It's just, that's one thing I loved about professional wrestling. It's had its own terminology. It's a lot of things, a lot of nooks and crannies and ins and outs that really made the business what it is today. And it's pretty cool, man. And you had wrestlers who were best known for what they did in the ring from a competitive standpoint, but you had those wrestlers who were great, better probably outside the ring in terms of promos. How good were they on the mic? But that's the thing about it. Not every wrestler was great in the ring, and not every wrestler was great on the mic. You had those ones who were really, really, you had some that were good at both, but it was rare. It was really, really rare. And I've always kind of took more to the wrestlers who were great in the ring, because to me it's all about what you do in the ring. But that's not, as I got older, I found out how important being on the mic is. It was, it was really, really, it's really, really important. One of the biggest names in wrestling, Hulk Hogan. Was a big name in the 80s, and he was kind of like the guy who made, he was like one of those big names, him along with Andre the Giant. Those were the guys that really made professional wrestling global. Like, even if you're not a wrestling fan, you know who the hell Hulk Hogan was. It is, man. So it was a lot of, that's when wrestling became entertaining. Back in the days, it was kind of like, just basically what you did in the ring. There was there was a lot of personality in the ring, but you really didn't get to see the personality out of the ring. Even though you had promos and stuff, but like as the years of promos became more of the performances. It wasn't something that was really done a lot. But during the territory days, you had guys who were just great on the mic. You had, the late great, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. He was one of the best ever on the mic and in the ring. And one of my personal favorites, another one, the late great Roddy Piper, man. He was something else. He was kind of like how, Stone Cold Steve Austin was. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like he was kind of like the Stone Cold of his time. The guy who was, trash talking and stuff like that. Sometimes he would antagonize people, but people loved him for it. That was the crazy thing about it. He was like mostly a heel, was mostly a bad guy. He had like bad guy tendencies and stuff like that, but people loved him for it. And he was just one of those guys who could get away with murder. No matter what he did, the fans always loved him for it. So Roddy Piper was one of my favorites. Rest in peace, Roddy. And but me personally, I think that the greatest guy on the mic, me personally ever, was the late great Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh yeah, that guy, man. I'm telling you, man. I can't even put to words what that dude was doing on the mic. I mean, he was great in the ring as well, but he became one of the most commercialized wrestlers, man, because he had like this guttural voice and stuff like that. And this Macho Man Randy Savage is coming for you, the cream of the crop, and it's just the way he spoke, man. And of course he showed up. He had all these bright colors and stuff like that, especially because a lot of wrestlers in the 80s, they were, the time of the 80s were very, very bright colors and stuff like that. So yeah, Macho Man, he really, really stood out, man. He was one of my personal favorites as well, man. Rest in peace to Randy Savage. Just a good one. And but you had the great great brawlers, Bruno Sammartino, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Undertaker, probably the most revered wrestler of our generation, of our times. The Undertaker is one of my personal favorites as well. And that's the thing about, in wrestling, you also had these big, kind of like these Mystique type of superhuman characters as well. And the Undertaker was one of them. He was like this. It's crazy because Undertaker, a guy who has been in wrestling for like 30 years, right? And there was nobody who's more revered than him probably throughout, the history of the WWE, man. He was just like the godfather, man. Like everybody respected him. Everybody looked up to the Undertaker, man. And when his character first came out, he kind of started off as like this mortician guy, and then he slowly kind of morphed into like a guy who died and kind of like came back and was walking amongst us. And then, I mean, like I said, Undertaker, also known as Mark Calloway, he reinvented it himself a couple of times. He went away from the dead man, and then he came back as, American Badass, was kind of like who Mark Calloway is in real life. And then he went back to the dead man act and stuff like that. But I've always just liked the character of the Undertaker. I love the kind of superhuman type of stuff. And he also, in the beginning, he also had a manager by the name of Paul Bearer. Paul Bearer, it was self-explanatory. That's what he was, a Paul Bearer. And he would carry this urn with the Undertaker, and the urn was supposed to be like the source of Undertaker's power and stuff like that. I mean, just the creativity and the writing that goes behind some of these characters, man. It was really, really cool, man. And like I said, you had the great showman, a big name in wrestling. He's really a crowd favorite. I mean, anybody who's a wrestling fan loves Shawn Michaels. I hated him back in the day because he was like a rival to Bret Hart, but you got to give it to him, man. Shawn Michaels was one of the greatest ever, man. He really is, man. There was nothing that guy couldn't do in the ring. I mean, he was one of the guys who was like a combination of all of it. He had his mic present, his mic skills were really good. It wasn't bad, but he had, all the charisma you wanted in a performance, stuff like that. And he was just skills in the ring and stuff like that. And whenever I would see him and Bret Hart working together, it was always a joy. And of course, I always rooted for Bret. Bret, that's my guy, man. Greatest technician and stuff like that. And but yeah, man, props to the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, man. But another guy, man, when he first came out, I didn't really see that much of him in terms of like how he was going to go and not, because of course in the business of wrestling, the wrestlers really don't have control of where their career really goes. It's all about the writing and the creative. If the creative think that you can go far and generate a lot of cachet and stuff like that, then you get this thing in the wrestling called push. Basically, what that means is that, if you how well you do and how well the crowd responds to you, then you get that push. As one of probably the greatest announcer of all time, Jim Ross, good old JR, talks about that push. I listen to him still to this day. He has a podcast called Grilling JR, which is really, really funny when he talks about the old days. But you get that push, and it determines how high you go, because in wrestling they have these brackets, whether you're a top card or mid card, or you're either like a squash, or they don't call them squash anymore, they call them like enhancement talents and stuff like that. But back in the day they called them squash guys. Basically, it was a person that you get like a tryout, and you get TV time, and you go out there and you just get demolished by a big name and stuff like that. That's what they used to call them back in the day, squash, but now they call them enhancement talents now. But but like I said, I've always loved the technicians, the guys who really, you can see that they had that type of wrestling DNA. A lot of people couldn't compete with those guys. I feel like those were like the best guys and stuff like that. And one of my personal favorites is like Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle, that was a guy who, a buddy of mine, he knew like right from the back. Once he saw him, he's like, man, he said, this guy's gonna be nasty. I didn't really see it at first, but but as the time went on, I knew what the hell he was seeing. And Kurt Angle, man, that guy is just, if you were to take Bret Hart out the equation, he definitely would be number one for me, man. Like, he is the most intense guy, man. And that's the one thing I've always liked, those wrestlers who have that type of collegiate Greco-Roman type backgrounds, the collegiate style wrestlers, because those are the guys that they're like fish to water. They come out of like the collegiate type circuit, and then you go right into the professional scene, and they just click, because since they were actual wrestlers, right? These were guys who really, really knew what they're doing. They just had, like I said, they already had the in-ring skills, but they just had to perfect that out-ring stuff, mic. They pretty much had to perfect the entertainment value. And Kurt Angle was that guy who really caught on quick, because you do have those wrestlers who have those backgrounds, like fighting backgrounds, like Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was another guy, like, who was known for the UFC, and then he made the transition over to professional wrestling. Those guys who actually have those backgrounds, they catch on quick. Not all of them are great when it comes to the mic and the entertainment part of it, but there's nothing they can't do in the ring. I also love the Steiner brothers, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner. I love the Steiner brothers back in the day. Again, guys who had wrestling backgrounds. I believe they came out the University of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. They were great too, man, and just so many great talents, man. The late great Scott Hall, better known as Razor Ramon. He was great too, and Big Daddy Cool Diesel. Kevin Nash, and another guy. And like I said, in wrestling, they also have this art of selling. And if you don't know what selling is like, it's how you take the punch, it's how you take the maneuver, and what made wrestling entertaining also is when you see wrestlers who would kind of sell, but they will like do it like over the top. Like, sometimes you will kick a guy, and it was just a basic toe kick, a kick to the gut. When you see it in the movie, some guy gets kicked in the gut, they would just kind of like bend over, they would like hunker over, bend over. But you had guys like Curt Hennig who would like take a kick or take a punch, and he would just like corkscrew and flip and just throw his body around the ring. That was very entertaining as well. And I think Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, was like the best at it, man. Just when it came to just selling moves, man. He made just a simple maneuver look worse than any natural disaster. So the art of selling was something that I've always loved too. I've always loved the guys who can really sell maneuvers, who weren't just flat. Because you had a lot of guys who really didn't sell all that good, but you had guys who sold really, really great. And I've always loved Curt Hennig for that, man. He was not only a great talent, but he was a great seller as well. And it's nice to hear how, over the years, how Bret Hart really spoke of Curt Hennig. And he loved working with him. And he always referred to working with Curt Hennig was not really work, it was a night off. Because also in wrestling, because it's theatrics and it's a performance, the key is to not go out there and hurt your opponent. As JR says, when the bell rings, you got to protect each other. So you're pretty much, trusting the opposition not to injure you and vice versa. So it's not really going about hurting people. And obviously sometimes the accidents do happen and stuff like that. When you had like extreme wrestling, like ECW, where dudes were like throwing people on barbed wire and tables that were on fire. And also in wrestling, people would use weapons like chair shots and stuff like that. And obviously today, a lot of that's calmed down because a lot of the older wrestlers, when you see them today, a lot of them are no longer with us because it was a lot of you know a lot of that stuff really caught up with you. And of course, there was a lot of substance abuse and stuff like that back in the day. But because wrestlers back then really didn't have the medical attention that they needed like they do today. I mean, now when you see the WWE, you have like medical staff and traveling with the company and stuff like that. So it's good to see. So you don't see as much injuries like you do today. Obviously, it kind of takes something away from the extreme part of it. For example, when you see a guy like Mankind, better known as Mick Foley today, wasn't the greatest, in-ring performer, but he was like the ultimate crash dummy of wrestling. At least in my generation, when I was really watching wrestling during what they call the Attitude Era, which is like the greatest period of the history of the WWE. Man, the Attitude Era, it was like the late 90s going into the early 2000s. It was just a great time for the WWE. But Mick Foley, he was the guy. The things that he did, you could not pay any wrestler to do it. He would just throw himself around, and he's mostly known for, because in wrestling you had different type of match types. You had TLCs, which is table, ladders, and chairs, tag team matches. You had cage matches, Hell in a Cell matches, Elimination Chambers, Royal Rumbles, Battle Royals, and dog collar matches from back in the day. You had all these different type of matches. That was also a part of the entertainment value. The writers and the creators had to keep the fans wanting more, so they would create all these different type of match types. It wasn't just one-on-one like how it first started. It got better and better and better in terms of the creativity. And Mick Foley is known for the infamous Hell in a Cell match. And Hell in a Cell is pretty much where you have the ring, and then you had this cage that would go over the ring, and it not only had walls, but it also had a ceiling. And then the wrestlers would climb to the top, and Mankind had this infamous match with The Undertaker. And what Mankind did is something you will never see again today. I tell you right now, man. For those who don't know, but if you do know, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When Undertaker threw Mankind off the top of that cell, it had to be like at least 25 to 30 feet high. It was up there, and he threw him down, and he hit the announce table on the outside, and Jim Ross made one of the greatest calls in wrestling history. Good God Almighty, they killed him. As God is my witness, he is broken in half, And that was also one thing that made wrestling great too. It was the commentary. When you had the calls, it was, because like I said, I grew up in a generation when you had guys like Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler. Jerry King Lawler was also a great wrestler, a wrestling legend in his own right. But when I came along, King was kind of transitioning over to the commentating side of the house and stuff like that. So he was, because a lot of people don't know that Jerry King Lawler was a great wrestler down in the Memphis territory. If you are somebody who are familiar with the Memphis territory, Jerry the King Lawler was the number one name. Along with him and what was the guy named Dennis Condrey, I think, had a tag team and stuff like that. But yeah, man, like JR and the King, man, that was the commentary that I mostly remember, and it was great. Macho Man Randy Savage was pretty good on commentary too, and God, man, it's just so much things to unravel when it comes to professional wrestling. Great commentating. You had managers who, you had those personalities, and you also had like great female wrestlers as well. I would just name a few. You had like one of my personal favorites. Trish Stratus was great. Lita, and you got Natalya today, Charlotte Flair. The late great Sherry Martel, and the late great Chyna, and it's just so many names to unravel, man. Victoria, Molly Holly, and Sable, and Tori Wilson, and just so many great talents, man. So I just want to give the girls their shot, or the ladies their due, because back in the funny thing about it, it was a lot of great women in the 80s too that they really don't talk about. But then when the Attitude Era came into the late 90s, women were kind of seen more as, the eye candy and stuff like that. You used to have the bra and panties matches and the mud wrestling stuff like that. And even though, I mean, they don't really need that stuff today, but the funny thing about it, like it was, like I said, I mean, they knew what worked back in those days now. So, but now, the women today are, pretty much, doing what they do just like the guys are. You see a lot of great talent. Charlotte Flair is one of my favorites. Sonya Deville is really good. Asuka and Naomi and Natalia, who's the daughter of the late great D'Ambo Neidhart. Just a lot of great talents, man. And you of course you had your different weight classes. You had the super heavyweights who were the big guys like Yokozuna and Bam Bam Bigelow, who was some of my favorites. Vader but you had a class that was a class by themselves. You had the cruiserweights, who were the light guys, but those guys were like known for the Mexican lucha libre style, the luchador style and stuff like that, the acrobatic moves and stuff like that. Those are one of my favorites as well. If you didn't, if I wasn't, looking at watching the technicians, I love the luchadors as well. That lucha libre style. Ultimo Dragon was definitely one of my favorites. A Japanese wrestler who was a combination of martial arts attacks and luchador. That Japanese strong style mixed with the lucha libre stuff. He was just one of my favorites, man. I love Ultimo Dragon. Juventud Guerrera, Chavo Guerrero, the late great Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, probably the greatest. This man is still going, along with his son Dominic, and they're doing big things. Rey Mysterio is probably the biggest name from the lucha libre style that a lot of people in America know. But yeah, man, the cruiserweights, those guys in the class by themselves. Like when I watched WCW, those were kind of like mostly the matches that I was looking forward to. If Booker T wasn't in the ring, or Brett when he was there, along with guys like DDP, Raven, do I dare say his name? Chris Benoit, and guys like that, and Sting and stuff like that. When the Luchadors came out, man, like my face was like pressed against the glass of the TV, man, because those matches were so entertaining, man. So all those acrobatic moves, guys throwing themselves around. It was just a beautiful, beautiful art form, man. And I mean, you don't see much of the lucha libre style today. I mean, nowadays everybody wants to be an acrobat. Obviously, I think it's kind of too much of it now because it's not just limited to cruiserweights anymore. You see a lot of guys who are like 200 plus just doing it. Everybody wants to do suicide dives and stuff like that. So it's kind of like watered down for me today. So it's not as special as it used to be. But yeah, man, like Chavo, I love Chavo. He was one of my favorites as well, man. But like I said, man, the professional wrestling, man, it just, I know a lot of people say wrestling's for booger eaters. I've heard somebody say that, but it's when you've been watching it at a young age, like I have, it's always gonna have that special place, man. It never really goes away, really, because of course you have outlets online where you can watch the old days and all the great classic matches and stuff like that, which I still do to this day. I can always find myself watching the classic Bret Hart match, Booker T and Chavo and Eddie and Ultimo and Ray and just all the greats, man. It's just, yeah, man. Professional wrestling, and I don't think it's a profession that's gonna go anytime soon. I mean, it's still kind of going strong, with the WWE and AEW and yeah, man. I mean, the Japanese circuit, and of course, it's very big in Mexico as well. But yeah, man. So all of the wrestling fans out there, keep doing what you're doing. And until next time, safe journey. Peace.